everyone. Welcome to Wine Simplified, a wine podcast for cork dorks and those who want to be. I am your host, Carrie, also known as Winecita. That is the name of my blog and website. I am a WSET Level 3 certified wine educator with a background in education and a passion for all things vino. I currently serve as the wine lead at the Good Pour Wine and Spirits Marketplace in Longwood, Florida. The store isn't a sponsor of this podcast or affiliated with it, but if you happen to find yourself in the area, please stop by and say hello. So let's get started. Thank you for popping in again to Wine Simplified. If you have paid attention the last couple of weeks, we have started at the very, very basics. What is wine from grape to glass? And in the last episode, I had touched on the 9 different types and styles of wine. So we are going to now go in week by week, each of those styles a little bit deeper. And today it is sparkling wine. I think anytime you've stared at a wall of sparkling wine, you might be tempted to say, hey, where's the champagne? Or you're wondering what the difference is. You're not alone. There is quite a large world of sparkling wine out there. And so today I want to break down those real differences between the big ones that you've heard: champagne, Prosecco, Cava, and even some other bubblies that you may not have heard. We'll get into how they're made, what they taste like, and how to find one that you'll actually enjoy without overthinking it. So buckle up. This is going to be a deeper episode and I'm going to cover a lot. So hopefully you can hang in there with me. And as always, feel free to like, follow the show, share with friends, and comment any questions that you have after this. And I will be happy to answer. You can also hit me up at carrie@winecita.com. And let's get going. So first we're going to start with the big one, the one that everybody thinks about, the king of sparkling wines, or queen, depending on how you want to go. Champagne. Champagne gets a ton of credit and honestly, a lot of marketing, a lot of marketing dollars, but what really sets it apart. Everybody, sometimes people come in to me and say, I want champagne, but they have a $15 price point. And that's when I know that they're looking for sparkling wine. And there are some great value quality sparkling wines there, which we'll talk about. But let's start with the creme de la creme, if you will, what really sets it apart. So to be champagne, it has to come from the Champagne region in northern France. This is typically cooler, tons of champagne houses. The wine must be made using the traditional method. So the traditional method is a labor-intensive process. This is where the second fermentation, which is the fermentation that makes that sparkling wine bubbly, it happens inside the bottle. So that second fermentation actually will create a pressure in the bottle, and that's what gives you fine, persistent bubbles. So a high-quality champagne, you're going to see these really fine, delicate bubbles, as opposed to some other methods, which we will talk about, where they can be a little bit bigger, maybe a little bit rough around the edges, those bubbles. But a well-made champagne, really nice, fine, elegant bubbles. Then after that pressure is created, it's going through second fermentation, the wine will sit on dead yeast cells. I know that sounds disgusting. It's not. It is called lees, Lees. And it will sit on that lees for months, sometimes years. That's what actually gives champagne its signature flavors: toast, brioche, almond, that creamy texture that a lot of people like in their sparkling wine. For a non-vintage champagne, it must age for at least 15 months before it's released, and at least 12 of those have to be on the lees. And for vintage champagne, it's a minimum of 3 years, usually more. Now, speaking of vintage and non-vintage, you will actually see a lot more non-vintage typically on the shelves of champagne, because a lot of champagne houses will keep a portion back, little fractions back of each vintage, so that, they can really adjust from year to year to create a house style and make sure that they have enough wine to produce a champagne if there's maybe a low harvest or something like that. So a lot of wines are non-vintage because it's actually a mix of different vintage years. Now, if a producer has a fantastic vintage, the grapes are beautiful, they have enough of it, they will then put out what is a vintage sparkling, a vintage champagne. So that's when you'll actually see the vintage year on the bottle, typically more expensive because they are much rarer in the world of champagne. There are 3 main grapes used in Champagne, produced in the Champagne region: Pinot Noir, Chardonnay, and Pinot Meunier. You have probably heard of the first two and not the third. Pinot Meunier is generally never a single varietal and always used for blending in champagne. A Blanc de Blanc, if you see Blanc de Blanc on the label, that means 100% Chardonnay. It means white of whites. And so that is going to be made of Chardonnay. If you see Blanc de Noir, that's going to be the red grape. So Pinot Noir is going to be the juice used solely in that Blanc Noir. And if you happen to see a rosé champagne, also not common in Champagne, this is typically produced in two ways: by blending different wines or by bleeding off the red grapes into the champagne. So you might not see a lot of rosé champagne from year to year because a lot of times they're going for a Blanc de Noir or a Blanc de Blanc. But if you do see a rosé champagne, they can be beautiful. They are beautiful and definitely fun and festive and worth a try. Champagne is really high acid, obviously effervescent and sparkly, but good champagne is got high acidity. It's really well structured, and it really is built to pair with real food. So you don't just have to save it for celebrations. Any sparkling wine really is a natural palate cleanser, so they go great is an aperitif at the beginning of your meal, or of course with dessert. But honestly, if you really don't know what to pair, maybe you have a funky dish and you're not sure what to pair with it, try it with a sparkling wine, because that effervescence really can hold up to a lot of dishes. I particularly like it actually with French fries. I think there's a national day somewhere, like National Champagne and French Fry Day. Because those bubbles and creaminess can really handle grease and salt. And so I can be a little bougie like that. But if I have a sparkling wine, I like to have some French fries with it. Now let's zoom out a little bit. Let's talk about some other traditional method sparkling wines. So champagne is the most famous, but it is not the only sparkling wine made this way. So let's go still in France, but zooming out of Champagne a little bit, to Crémants. I find that Crémants are some of the best value sparkling wines on the shelf. These are wines made in places like Loire, Alsace, or Burgundy. Same traditional method. Typically, the grape varieties used in Crémants will depend on the specified French region where they are produced. So while Champagne strictly adheres to Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, and Pinot Meunier, Crémant really does allow for a wider range of grapes, and they often incorporate local varieties from the regions. So for example, Crémant de Bourgogne, Burgundy, this was the first region to be awarded the Crémant appellation, the ability to use Crémant in 1975. And the grape varieties are really similar to Champagne, primarily Chardonnay and Pinot Noir, but additionally, they will use Gamay. So that same grape that comes out of Beaujolais and your Beaujolais Nouveaux, that Gamay, it really can be included to add some fruitiness and vivaciousness. Now, rosé versions are often made from 100% Pinot Noir. Now we have the Crémant de Loire. So Loire Crémants are going to be mainly based on Chenin Blanc. They do save their Sauvignon Blancs for their sincere, typical higher end white wines, but they grow a lot of Chenin Blanc too. And though a certain percentage of Chardonnay is able to be used in these sparkling wine blends, they will generally use Chenin Blanc. And the key appellations in the Loire that actually make sparkling wine, make a Crémant, would include Anjou-Samar, Touraine, and Vouvray. Then you have Crémant de Limon. So this is in the Languedoc, and this came out in 1989 is when it was introduced. And Crémant de Limon is often Chardonnay dominated. It's complemented by Pinot Noir, Mauzac, that is Mauzak. Again, you're not going to see this really as a single varietal, but it is a local grape there that they will blend in, and Chenin Blanc. So those other grapes will play some supporting roles. This will contrast with a Blanquette de Limon from the same region, which is primarily made from the local Mauzac grape, but honestly, I haven't seen a lot exported into the United States. So if you find one, let me know where you found it, because I'd be curious to try. Or honestly, I'll just take a trip to the Languedoc one of these days, right? For my smart buy of the week, we are now talking about sparkling wine this week, so let's talk about a red for once, Lambrusco. Yes, you might be actually thinking about Lambrusco, that syrupy, sweet red wine, it comes in the big 1.5 liter bottles, 70s, 80s. Your aunt keeps it in her fridge, that type of a thing. No offense to my aunt. My aunt actually never kept it in the fridge, but I know some people that did. But Lambrusco really, the brand's kind of been ruined by those types of Lambruscos, because today we have versions from producers like Clado Chiarelli, Medici Armette, Otello. They're dry. Lambrusco, a high quality Lambrusco is dry, or at least off dry. Fizzy, so not quite sparkling, but lightly effervescent, frizzante, if you will, and really food friendly. So they go great with pizza, charcuterie, prosciutto. You can even get away with like barbecued ribs, black cherry, violets on the nose. So if you find a Lambrusco that is not bottom shelf Lambrusco, but also not crazy expensive, you can find one for $16.99, $17.99. So it's a nice Italian, lightly sparkling wine, and it is wildly underpriced for the quality. So don't be afraid to ask your local wine person in your wine shop if they've got a good quality Lambrusco. I will post some links in the description of this video as always, and definitely give it a try. And also chill it. Not too much. Lambrusco really shines when it's just slightly cooler than room temperature. Now let's get back to it. Then we have the Crémant d'Alsace. So this region is a huge volume producer of Crémant, and the key varieties used are some of their noble grapes there: Pinot Blanc, Pinot Gris. Riesling will also play a part, although 100% varietal versions are very rare. 100% Pinot Noir wines, known as that Blanc de Noir, are really popular in Alsace, as well as Crémant Rosé. And for a Crémant Rosé, it has to be 100% Pinot Noir. And they do have a higher tier. I can never pronounce it the French way right, but it's basically emotion, something like that. And this must contain at least 75% Pinot Blanc, Chardonnay, and or Pinot Noir. But we're not done with the Crémants. Those three are the largest regions, I guess, or more famous regions for Crémant, but there are some smaller Crémant producing regions. And so if I want to dive a little bit deeper into that, I will disclaim if some of my pronunciation is off. If you are French listening to this, I do apologize. Feel free to correct me. One of the beauties of WSET is I did a lot of writing and reading. Don't necessarily have to pronounce as much out loud, but of course, try, and we all learn as we go, right? But as we dive in, we could do Crémant de Die, that is in the Rhone Valley, and the grapes used there are Clairette, Aligoté, and Muscat à Petit Grain. So it kind of sounds like petite grains if you were actually looking at it. And then you have Crémant de Jura, which is in Jura, and this is generally 50% Chardonnay. And I honestly have not seen a ton of Crémants. I know they're out there in the United States, but at least able to get at my shop or anything from those regions, but would be really fun to try. Last but not least, Crémant de Bordeaux. So Bordeaux is predominantly known for red wine. Everybody knows their Bordeaux blends, left bank, right bank, all that good stuff. But it actually is permitted to make sparkling wine as well. Typically, the primary groups in a Crémant de Bordeaux are the same that you would find in a white Bordeaux, Semillon, Sauvignon Blanc, Muscadel. Sometimes they'll use Cab Franc, Cab Sauv Merlot, and Petit Verdot, although oftentimes those are saved for the Bordeaux blends, but they do show up in sparkling wines out of Crémant de Bordeaux. So to sum up all of those, really, though Chardonnay and Pinot Noir are still commonly the most ones used in Crémant regions, each little area that does Crémant also brings in their own style and sort of regional flair through their local grapes as well, which is really cool and be fun to do a side-by-side tasting of different Crémants from different regions. Moving on to the next sparkling wine that uses traditional method is Cava. So I promise you, honestly, when I'm in the store and I'm looking for a sparkling wine, I tend to go for a Crémant or a Cava just for quality, for value, beyond just a regular sparkling wine. But Cava also uses this traditional method. So it's Spain's kind of, hey, Champagne, we see you, and we're going to show you what we got. And so they use local grapes like Macabeo, Zorella, Periada, sometimes Chardonnay. It's less yeasty than Champagne, but still very structured and generally done in a higher volume. They've got some more land space. A lot more Cava is produced. So you can typically find a Cava significantly cheaper than a champagne, but don't let that fool you about its quality. Then Franciacorta. So Franciacorta is from the Lombardy region of Italy. It is mostly Chardonnay and Pinot Noir. So if you want an Italian wine made the champagne way, this is it. So Franciacorta is just a terrific sparkling wine. Over there, they'll call it Metodo Classico, which is essentially their traditional method, which is how it's produced. If you like sparkling wine and can get your hands on a Franciacorta, I highly suggest you try one. And then in South Africa, so going way down to the southern hemisphere, Methode Cap Classique is in South Africa. This is the same method, often using Chenin Blanc along with the Chardonnay and Pinot Noir. Tends to fly under the radar, but still absolutely delicious. And in all of these, you can look for terms like Reserva or Grand Reserva if you want some more complexity, because those wines will spend some more time on the lees. Next, we're going to move on to a completely different production method. This is called the tank method. Sometimes you might see it as Charmat Method, Charmat. And this will produce some lighter, fresher styles, usually less expensive, because second fermentation will happen in a pressurized tank, not the bottle. This is faster, it's more affordable, and it is used to preserve fresh, fruitier flavors. But the trade-off for that is often going to be less texture and less complexity as well. The most famous that uses this method is Prosecco. It's made with the Glera grape in a large area that spans about 9 provinces, typically in the Veneto area of Italy and some in the Friuli Venezia Giulia regions. And it really is named after the village of Prosecco, which is in the province of Trieste, Italy. Prosecco is generally known for having crisp, floral, fruity notes, green apple, pear, sometimes melon. Really goes for some easy sipping cocktails, aperitifs. Generally very, very affordable, but it does use this tank method, so you're not going to get any biscuit or brioche generally that you would from something that sat on the lees. Then there is Moscato d'Asti. So this is a lightly sparkling, lower alcohol, sweet sparkling wine. It tastes like peaches and orange blossom, typically really fun for the summer if you want something that can go with dessert. Most people have already heard of Moscato d'Asti and, of course, Prosecco. But if you are new to the world of wine and new to the world of sparkling wine, what you may not know about is German sparkling wine called Sekt, Sekt. This is probably my favorite style of sparkling wine that uses the tank method. Sometimes it is made traditionally, really higher end ones, and it will be labeled otherwise if so, but most of the time it's using the tank method. If you find one, it's a Riesling based version, though they are so good. I have one in my fridge right now. Can't wait to pop it open. But Germany is actually one of the biggest consumers of sparkling wine in the world. And much of this is because of their consumption of Sekt. Very little Sekt is actually exported. If you do have a Trader Joe's nearby, there is a fantastic one there that I buy. I can try to find a link to it I'll put it in the description of this, but there's a great one there and it is Riesling based. But generally they'll use imported grapes, sometimes from Italy or France. If you do see Deutscher Sekt on the label, that does mean that the grapes have to be grown in Germany. So if you see that, you know that those are German grapes, and the best ones, like I said, are made from Riesling. Typically, Sekt is light, dry, also fruity and floral, kind of, those same characteristics that you get out of Prosecco, but sometimes that Riesling just adds a little oomph. So definitely look for a Deutscher Sekt method. And sometimes, like I said, they will use the traditional method, but generally it is much more inexpensive because they use that Charmat or tank method. There is another method that is even more inexpensive, and you'll see this a lot on kind of, I hate to say, lower shelf sparkling wines. I'm not going to go too far in depth. It's called forced carbonation, and that's just a production method where the carbon dioxide gets injected actually into the wine when it's under pressure to create those bubbles after the fermentation's already happened. So it doesn't rely on the natural fermentation process to trap the gas. Kind of think about like Coca-Cola or Pepsi or how that's made. It's really used to quickly and efficiently carbonate the wine. And it is really favored for large scale production. So if you see something kind of high volume, lower shelf with really big bubbles, and it's very, very effervescent on the front end, like that's all you feel, odds are it might be forced carbonation. More premium quality Proseccos, Crémants, and everything that I've talked about previously, don't use this method. So at the end of the day, here's what really matters when you're picking a sparkling wine. Do you want something lean and crisp? Then you might be looking for a Prosecco or maybe even a Brut champagne. Or do you prefer something with like creamier texture, toasty notes, perhaps a nice high-end vintage champagne or an extended aged Cava? What do I mean by Brut? Sweetness level does matter. So here's a quick cheat sheet. Now, I will say this. Different regions, different countries will have different levels and different coding systems. But for exports to the United States, you generally will see one of these 5 on the label. And so if you see Brut Nature, that means it's bone dry. There's no residual sugar. If it's extra Brut, it's still dry. Somewhere in between the bone dry and the general dry, this is where it's going to get really confusing. If you see Brut, this is the most common. That does mean that it is dry. There might still be a little bit of residual sugar in that style. And then if it is extra dry, it's going to be off dry to semi-sweet. And if it is demi-sect or doux, D-O-U-X, that is a sweet sparkling wine. Also, when you're opening sparkling wine, you want to hold the cork still and twist the bottle, not the other way around. A quiet hiss is really better than a loud pop. I know everybody likes to see that cork go off and champagne flying around in a celebration. You're just wasting a lot of good champagne that way. I will maybe try to find a video to link or put in a video about how to properly open a sparkling wine at some point in the future. But that's it for the week. I know that was a lot. Sparkling wine does not have to be intimidating. Whether you're splurging on champagne or you're picking up a $15 Prosecco, the goal is really simple. Find what you like and enjoy it. Try new things. If you learned something, please pass this episode on to someone else who loves wine or wants to love it more. You can find me on Instagram at Winacida. Drop a comment and tell me your go-to bubbly. Till next time, cheers.